The sun had barely started to rise, casting a soft golden hue over the sleepy town of Milford. It was the kind of morning that promised nothing more than the regular grind of small-town life. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional chirp of birds waking up, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted through the air. For Mark Dawson, the day was just another in a long line of similarly uneventful mornings. As the manager of the quaint Riverbend Inn, he had grown accustomed to the routine of his work, checking the bookings, ensuring the staff was on track, overseeing the front desk, and ensuring the hotel ran smoothly. The Riverbend Inn wasn't a luxury destination, nor was it a run-down establishment. It was somewhere in between, a charming, family-owned hotel that had been around for decades. Over the years, it had hosted everything from business travelers and family reunions to tourists passing through Milford on their way to more popular destinations. The quiet, unassuming nature of the hotel made it a perfect fit for the likes of Mark, a man who had always preferred things to remain calm and predictable. Mark had worked at the Riverbend Inn for 15 years, ever since he moved to Milford with his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Emma. At the time, he had dreamed of a fresh start. The idea of running a hotel was appealing, nothing too glamorous but comfortable enough to provide for his family. He had no idea that the steady rhythm of his life would be so easily disrupted, or that the ordinary would suddenly become extraordinary. It all began that morning, as Mark entered the hotel's lobby, his footsteps echoing on the polished wooden floors. The smell of fresh linens and coffee greeted him, and for a moment, he felt a sense of peace that came from knowing exactly what to expect. The hotel's receptionist, Lisa, a young woman in her 20s who had worked with Mark for a few years, greeted him with a smile as he entered. "Morning, Mark," she said as she adjusted the stack of papers on her desk. "All quiet so far. Looks like it's going to be a slow day." Mark nodded, scanning the front desk for any new bookings. Lisa was right, the hotel was usually slow during the middle of the week. Guests typically checked in during weekends, leaving the. Mark couldn't ignore the fact that Mr. Blackwood's mysterious behavior, coupled with the letter from Armitage, painted a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. He couldn't ignore the possibility that Mr. Blackwood wasn't just a guest passing through, he was a part of something much larger and much more dangerous than a simple hotel manager could comprehend. Mark's stomach churned as he thought about the implications of his discoveries. What had he gotten himself into? His thoughts were interrupted when Lisa approached him again, this time with a look of deep concern. She didn't have to say anything for Mark to know that something was wrong. Lisa had been quiet lately, more so than usual, and her eyes were shadowed with worry. "Mark, I don't know if this is a good idea," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark looked up, his heart skipping a beat. Lisa had always been the pragmatic one, the one who could be relied upon to think things through. If she was worried, then things had escalated beyond what Mark had imagined. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, his voice strained with an edge of impatience. "I overheard something," Lisa continued, glancing around the lobby to make sure no one was within earshot. "Mr. Blackwood, he's not who he says he is. He's been talking to someone on the phone, someone who sounded like they were giving him instructions. It's not just a random conversation, Mark. It's serious. He mentioned something about the operation and timing, and something about you being in the way." Mark felt his blood run cold. This was no longer just a matter of strange behavior, it was now a direct threat. He knew that whatever Mr. Blackwood was involved in, it wasn't just criminal, it was personal. The mention of him being in the way was a warning, and Mark realized he had been right to feel uneasy. It wasn't paranoia. It was something much worse. "What else did you hear?" Mark pressed, his mind racing as he processed the new information. "I couldn't catch everything. It was too quick. But I think he's planning something big. I don't think he's here just to stay in a hotel, Mark. He's here for a reason, and I think it has to do with Milford." Mark's heart thudded in his chest. Milford had always been a quiet, peaceful town. Sure, there were the usual small-town dramas, the petty rivalries, the gossip, the occasional stolen car, but nothing like this. Nothing involving the kind of operation Lisa was suggesting. He tried to shake off the panic that was beginning to creep in, but the more he thought about it, the more his mind swirled with terrifying possibilities. He had to confront Blackwood. He had to know what was going on, before it was too late. But Mark. As the days passed, Mark's unease about Mr. Blackwood's presence only grew. The Riverbend Inn had a particular rhythm to it, and guests like Mr. Blackwood, guests who insisted on privacy, avoided interactions, and stayed in their rooms without a word, were unsettling to the otherwise peaceful environment. The entire hotel staff, including Lisa, had noticed the subtle changes in the air whenever Mr. Blackwood was mentioned. Even though nothing outwardly suspicious had happened, the strange phone call, the odd mannerisms of the guest, and his refusal to comply with the usual procedures left Mark with a deep sense of foreboding. Mark tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing on his usual tasks, greeting the regular visitors, answering the phone, and ensuring the hotel was running smoothly. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with this guest. And it wasn't just Mr. Blackwood's secrecy that bothered him, it was the feeling that there was something darker lurking just beneath the surface, something he wasn't meant to see or know. It was a quiet afternoon when the first real sign of trouble emerged. Mark had just finished a meeting with the hotel's maintenance manager when Lisa approached him with an uneasy look on her face. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something," she said, her voice low. Mark nodded, gesturing for her to continue. He knew something had been bothering her, and if anyone had noticed the oddities surrounding Mr. Blackwood, it was Lisa. "I went to check on Mr. Blackwood this morning," Lisa began, her eyes darting around as if afraid someone might overhear. "He asked for more towels, and when I went into his room, there was something weird. I mean, I don't know if it's anything, but there's a hidden compartment in his closet. It's like a false back or something. I thought I saw it shift, and I didn't know what to do." Mark's eyes narrowed. He had long suspected something was off, but hearing about a hidden compartment confirmed his suspicions. His mind raced, thinking of the implications. Was Mr. Blackwood hiding something illegal? Had he been involved in something dangerous? Or was it all just a coincidence, a strange quirk of a guest with odd tastes? Whatever the case, Mark knew he needed to look further into it. He couldn't just ignore this anymore. Later that evening, Mark waited for the right moment to investigate the hidden compartment himself. He had to be careful. If Mr. Blackwood caught him snooping, it could mean the end of his career. But something inside him, an instinct honed over years of managing this hotel, told him that this was no ordinary guest. This wasn't just a rich businessman looking for a quiet getaway. Mr. Blackwood's presence here was no accident, and Mark was about to find out why. Around midnight, Mark found himself standing outside room 306 once again. The hall was eerily quiet, the hotel as still as it ever got at this hour. He knocked softly on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no answer. He waited, his fingers twitching with anticipation. Another knock, louder this time, and still, no response. Mark didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but the temptation to get answers outweighed the fear. He slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open, just enough to slip inside. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tightly, blocking out the last remnants of the evening light. Mr. Blackwood wasn't in the room, and the bed was untouched. The only sign that anyone had been there recently was the faint smell of cologne in the air. Mark's eyes immediately scanned the room, looking for anything that seemed out of place. His gaze landed on the closet in the corner, the same closet that Lisa had mentioned. Mark moved closer, his hands trembling as he carefully inspected the back wall of the closet. Sure enough, he found what Lisa had described, a thin seam that ran horizontally across the wooden panel, almost invisible to the naked eye. Without thinking, he pressed against it. There was a slight click, followed by the creak of the panel shifting. It opened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a stack of papers, neatly organized, but their contents were unclear. Mark's hands shook as he reached inside, pulling out the top paper. It was an envelope, and the handwriting on it was unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat. The envelope was addressed to someone named C. Blackwood. But that was the least surprising part. The sender's name was listed as G. Armitage. Mark had heard the name before. Whispers about Armitage were common in Milford, though no one ever spoke about him openly. Armitage was rumored to be involved in organized crime, with connections that stretched far beyond the town. He had made a lot of enemies in Milford, and his name was synonymous with secrecy and power. Mark had never seen any concrete proof of this, but now, holding an envelope from Armitage, he realized that the rumors might not be so far off after all. His mind raced as he carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was thick and yellowed, and the writing was bold, almost hurried. It was a warning, direct and blunt. Stay low. Do not let anyone suspect you're here. Trust no one. The plan is in motion. You know what to do. Mark felt his stomach drop. The letter was a message of some kind, a cryptic instruction to someone clearly involved in something far larger than a simple getaway. Mr. Blackwood wasn't just some random guest, he was part of something much bigger, something Mark had no understanding of. But before Mark could process the full implications, a soft click at the door made him freeze. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. His heart stopped. Mr. Blackwood had returned. Mark barely had time to hide the envelope before the door to the room creaked open. Mr. Blackwood stepped inside, his face hidden by the brim of a dark hat, the collar of his jacket pulled up high. Mark quickly stepped back into the shadows, his breath held tight in his chest. He couldn't afford to get caught. The guest moved with purpose, not noticing Mark's presence. Mark's mind raced, and for a brief moment, he considered confronting him, demanding answers about the letter, the hidden compartment, and the strange behavior. But something stopped him. A deep, gnawing feeling told him that doing so might be dangerous, that the web Mr. Blackwood was tangled in was far more intricate than he could ever imagine. Mark backed out of the room, his footsteps silent, and quietly closed the door behind him. He stood there for a moment, his pulse racing, trying to calm himself. He had uncovered a piece of the puzzle, but the more he discovered, the more he realized that he had stumbled into a situation far beyond his control. It was only a matter of time before Mr. Blackwood's true identity came to light, and when it did, Mark knew things would change forever. But for now, he was left with more questions than answers. What had he uncovered? What was Mr. Blackwood involved in? And, most importantly, was Mark prepared for the storm that was coming? He had no way of knowing what Armitage and his people were capable of, but Mark knew one thing for sure: they were powerful. And if they said he was a liability, then it meant they had their eyes on him. His every move, every decision, would be watched. And it wasn't just his life on the line anymore, it was the safety of everyone he cared about. The days that followed were filled with a kind of paralysis, as if time had slowed down, each moment stretching endlessly before him. Mark had never been a man to act impulsively, but now, every decision seemed weighed down by the looming threat of disaster. He continued to run the hotel, continued to interact with the guests, but every action, every conversation, felt like it was under surveillance. His movements were deliberate, his words carefully chosen. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The stress of living under constant fear began to take its toll. Mark's sleep was fitful at best, his mind plagued by nightmares of Blackwood and Armitage. His marriage to Sarah, already strained before all of this, began to unravel. She could sense the change in him, his growing distance, his inability to focus, his constant preoccupation with the hotel and what was happening behind the scenes. She didn't know the full story, couldn't know. But the cracks in their relationship were becoming undeniable. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the hotel, Mark sat in the small dining room of the Riverbend Inn, staring into his half-empty coffee cup. The place was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator in the back providing the only sound in the otherwise still room. Sarah sat across from him, her eyes searching his face, trying to gauge his mood. "You've been acting strange lately," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "You've been distant, Mark. I don't know what's going on, but it's like you're not really here anymore." Mark felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't meant to pull away from her, but the weight of everything happening had consumed him. How could he explain it to her without dragging her into the nightmare? How could he tell her that his entire world was being slowly consumed by people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted? "I'm just tired," he said, forcing a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It's been a long few weeks. Things at the hotel have been stressful." Sarah didn't seem convinced. "I know it's been tough, but you're shutting me out. I don't know how much longer we can keep pretending everything's fine." Mark's heart ached as he looked at her. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain why he couldn't focus, why he couldn't be the man she wanted him to be. But he couldn't. He couldn't drag her into this dark world. He had already brought enough danger to her doorstep just by being connected to the Riverbend Inn. "Everything's going to be okay," Mark said, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. Couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something was about to happen, something big. And it was only a matter of time before it would come crashing down. As Mark passed by room 306, a door cracked open just a fraction. He paused, his heart pounding in his chest. The faintest sound, a whisper, drifted through the crack. He stood motionless, straining to hear. It was faint, but the words were unmistakable. "It's time. We move tonight." Mark's breath caught in his throat. The words sent a chill through his entire body. It was happening. Whatever this was, whatever Armitage and Blackwood had been planning, it was coming to fruition. Mark couldn't let it happen. He couldn't stand by and watch as these men carried out their dangerous plans. But what could he do? He was just one man against an empire of power and influence. What did he have? Nothing but the truth, and that, in this world, seemed to be worth very little. Without thinking, Mark stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the door. He pushed it open gently, as quietly as possible, and slipped inside. The room was dark, but there was enough light from the hallway to make out the figures inside. Blackwood stood near the window, his back to Mark, speaking to someone on the phone in low, urgent tones. Mark crept forward, his pulse racing, but his body moved of its own accord, driven by a need to know. He had to know what was going on. He couldn't live in this fog of fear anymore. As he moved closer, he could hear more clearly now. "We're on schedule," Blackwood was saying. "The operation goes down tonight. The pieces are in place. The distraction will be enough. Once Armitage is in the clear, we move on to the next phase." Mark's mind spun. Operation? Distraction? What was he talking about? And what role did Armitage play in all of this? He knew Armitage was dangerous, but now it seemed that Blackwood had more control over the situation than Mark had realized. This was no longer just about a criminal underworld. This was about something far more elaborate, far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Before he could process more, the door behind him creaked. Mark whipped around, his heart skipping a beat. Sarah stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. She had been looking for him, and had clearly caught sight of him entering the room. Panic flashed in her eyes as she took in the scene. "Mark, what are you doing?" she whispered urgently, her voice trembling with fear. I need to know what's going on, Sarah," Mark replied, his voice hoarse. They're planning something. Something terrible. And I can't let it happen. I need to stop them. Sarah's face tightened. She had seen the change in him, the fear that had taken hold of his every decision. She had heard the phone calls, sensed the tension, but even now, as she stood in the doorway, she didn't fully understand what was at stake. Mark could see it in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to support him, but the weight of the truth was too much for anyone to bear. They can't be allowed to get away with this, Mark continued, his voice growing more desperate. I have to do something. I have to stop them before it's too late. But Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking as she took a step toward him. Mark, you're in over your head. You don't know what you're dealing with. You're risking everything, for what? For a hotel? For something you don't even fully understand? Mark felt a deep pang of guilt. She was right, in a way. He didn't fully understand what he was up against. But what else could he do? He couldn't just sit back and wait for the inevitable. He had to act. He had to protect them, his family, the hotel, everyone he cared about. Please, Sarah, he pleaded, taking her hands in his. I need you to trust me. I can't do this alone. If I don't stop them, they'll tear everything apart. Everything we've built. You, me, Emma. But Sarah pulled her hands away, shaking her head. I don't want you to do this, she said softly. I don't want to lose you. Mark felt his heart break. He didn't want to lose her either, but he knew the truth. The moment he had stepped into this world, he had lost the illusion of safety. The Riverbend Inn, the life he had worked so hard to build, was caught in the crossfire of something much bigger. And if he didn't stop Blackwood and Armitage, nothing would be safe, not his family, not the hotel, not his town. Before he could say anything more, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. It was too late to turn back now. Mark had no choice but to go through with it. With Sarah's eyes fixed on him, full of fear and confusion, Mark made his decision. He had to act. We'll figure this out, he said, his voice firm. But right now, I have to stop this. I have to confront Blackwood. Sarah's face paled as she looked at him, and for a moment, Mark saw the doubt in her eyes. But then, as if realizing the depth of the danger they were facing, she nodded slowly. Just come back to us. Please. Mark kissed her quickly on the forehead, then turned and left the room. His mind was set. There was no turning back. As he stepped into the hallway, the faintest sound of Blackwood's voice reached him, cutting through the silence. He had one shot to stop this. Mark moved quickly, his heart pounding as he made his way to the back entrance. He knew the time was now. He had to stop whatever Blackwood and Armitage were planning before it went any further. He couldn't let them destroy everything he had fought for, everything he had built.